They called him Baby Face at Quantico, just another fresh-faced recruit, who probably couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. 20 years old, 5'8", with the kind of soft features that made drill instructors question whether he'd even finished high school. Then came the day they put him behind a rifle for what should have been a routine marksmanship demonstration, and Tyler Rodriguez lined up a shot that defied every law of physics, probability, and common sense. A moving target at 1,200 yards in crosswinds that had been shutting down the range all afternoon. One shot, one impossibility made real. And when Gunnery Sergeant Stone saw who had taken that shot, her face went white as desert sand because she knew exactly what kind of monster they'd just witnessed wake up. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Want to know how a kid who looked like he belonged in algebra class instead of a war zone made the most impossible shot in Marine Corps history? The Virginia heat hung over Marine Corps Base Quantico like a wet blanket, even though October should have brought relief from the summer's brutality. The kind of oppressive humidity that made your utilities stick to your skin and turned every piece of metal into a branding iron waiting to happen. At 1400 hours, the sun beat down on Echo Range with the persistence of a drill instructor who'd found contraband in your footlocker, creating heat mirages that danced across the 1,000-yard markers like ghosts of missed shots. The wind was the real enemy today, though, gusting from the southeast at 15 to 25 miles per hour, with sudden shifts that could turn a perfect shot into an embarrassing miss faster than a recruit could drop his rifle. It was the kind of weather that made even seasoned marksmen pack up their gear and call it a day, the kind of conditions that turned precision shooting from science into pure guesswork. Echo Range stretched out like a brown scar across the Virginia landscape, marked by concrete barriers, steel target frames, and the kind of sterile military efficiency that turned natural terrain into a controlled environment for creating killers. The Range Master's Tower stood sentinel at the firing line, its windows reflecting the harsh afternoon sun like the eyes of some mechanical god watching over the ritual of lead and accuracy. Beyond the perimeter fence, Interstate 95 hummed with civilian traffic. People going about their ordinary lives, oblivious to the fact that inside the wire, young Americans were learning to reach out and touch someone at distances that would make a civilian's head spin. The sound of that distant traffic mixed with the occasional crack of rifle fire from adjacent ranges, creating a symphony of American normalcy punctuated by the sharp percussion of controlled violence. Tyler Rodriguez climbed out of the olive-drab transport truck wearing marine utilities that looked like they'd been issued about 5 minutes ago. Everything about him screamed fresh meat, from the way his cover sat, just a little too perfectly on his head, to the fact that his boots still held traces of the Paris Island sand that had witnessed his transformation from civilian to Marine just 4 months earlier. His name tape was so new it practically gleamed, and his rank insignia looked like it had been pressed on with mathematical precision by someone who'd never worn utilities in actual field conditions. But it wasn't just his gear that marked him as new. Tyler had the kind of face that made people underestimate him automatically. Smooth features that belonged on a college campus rather than a military installation. Dark eyes that seemed too gentle for someone trained to kill, and a build that suggested he might blow away in a strong wind rather than stand firm against an enemy assault. At 5'8" and maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, he looked like the kind of Marine that recruiting posters never featured, the kind that made civilians wonder if military standards had gotten soft. He moved across the gravel staging area with the careful precision of someone who was still learning how to be a Marine, still conscious of every step, every gesture, every way his body occupied space in this new world of military bearing and lethal competence. His rifle case was regulation issue, black plastic that had seen better days, carried with the cautious respect of someone who'd been thoroughly indoctrinated about the consequences of treating weapons carelessly. Staff Sergeant Mike Chun noticed him immediately, and not in a way that suggested career advancement was in Tyler's immediate future. Chun stood beside the range shed, his instructor badge catching the light as he surveyed the afternoon's collection of Marines, with the weary eye of someone who'd been doing this job long enough to spot trouble from 1,000 yards away. 15 years of molding Marines had given him a sixth sense for identifying the ones who were going to waste his time, and everything about Tyler Rodriguez screamed Project Case. Beside Chun, Corporal Danny Brooks squinted at the roster through sunglasses that had seen action in 3 different deployments. Brooks had transferred from Army to Marines 2 years ago, bringing with him the kind of inter-service rivalry that made him particularly harsh on Marines he thought were soft. His own background as an Army sniper had given him a superiority complex about marksmanship that made him especially critical of Marines who didn't immediately demonstrate expert level skills. The 2 NCOs had developed a professional partnership based on mutual cynicism and shared frustration with the declining quality of Marines coming through the pipeline. They'd perfected the art of spotting weakness, or what they perceived as weakness, in the steady stream of young Marines who cycled through their advanced marksmanship course. Another one, Brooks muttered, sliding Tyler's file across the metal table with the kind of dismissive force that suggested he'd already written off the afternoon as a waste of ammunition. Tyler Rodriguez, fresh out of Paris Island. Marksmanship scores were decent in basic, but that don't mean nothing here. Chun snorted, the sound carrying across the staging area with enough volume to ensure that Tyler heard it. Look at him. Danny, baby face. Probably never held a rifle before the Corps got hold of him. Bet he's one of those suburban kids who thinks Call of Duty counts as tactical training. They'd perfected this routine over the years, the casual cruelty disguised as professional assessment. It made them feel important, gave them a sense of superiority that helped them forget about their own frustrations with military life. The truth was that both men had reached the peak of their careers, and watching young Marines struggle made them feel like they still had relevance in a Corps that was evolving past their understanding. Lance Corporal Jake Thompson overheard their commentary and felt the familiar rush of superiority that came from being part of the in-crowd. At 22, Thompson had been stationed at Quantico long enough to consider himself a permanent fixture. On Echo Range, the unofficial king of the marksmanship course, his own shooting scores were legitimately impressive, good enough to earn him instructor duties and the kind of respect that made younger Marines look up to him. Thompson's buddy, PFC Alex Martinez, stood beside him cleaning his rifle with the nervous energy of someone who was always trying too hard to fit in. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Martinez idolized Thompson, followed his lead in everything, and had adopted his friend's casual arrogance as his own. Together, they formed the kind of toxic partnership that made military life miserable for anyone they perceived as weak. 20. Buck says he can't hit the 500-yard target, Thompson whispered, loud enough for Tyler to hear. Look at those hands, soft as a baby's bottom. Probably gets manicures. Martinez laughed with the forced enthusiasm of someone who desperately wanted to be accepted. Dude, I bet he asked for help loading his magazines. Probably doesn't even know which end the bullets come out of. Tyler didn't react to their commentary. He'd heard worse during his 4 months in the Corps. Learned to let the noise wash over him while he focused on the task at hand. There was something underneath his quiet exterior, though a stillness that came from somewhere deeper than military training, an economy of movement that suggested he was comfortable with himself in ways that went beyond the artificial confidence that Corps tried to instill. He approached the check-in desk where Corporal Lisa Wong sat behind a stack of paperwork, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Wong barely glanced up from her roster, marking Tyler's name with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd processed hundreds of Marines through the same routine. "Lane 12, she said without making eye contact. "Down at the end, you'll be shooting the M40A6 system today. Staff Sergeant Chun will brief you on the course of fire. Lane 12. Of course, the position where heat mirages were worst, where the wind patterns created unpredictable eddies, where they stuck the Marines they expected to fail quietly without disrupting the rhythm of more serious instruction." Tyler nodded once and made his way down the firing line, past Thompson and Martinez, who were enjoying their commentary too much to keep their voices down. "Money says he can't zero his rifle," Thompson continued. "Probably thinks the scope comes pre-adjusted from the factory." Tyler set his rifle case on the scarred wooden shooting bench at lane 12 and opened it, with the careful precision of someone who understood that weapons were serious business. Inside lay the M40A6 sniper system he'd been assigned, rifle that represented the pinnacle of Marine Corps' precision shooting technology, capable of accuracy that bordered on the supernatural in the right hands. The weapon was beautiful in the way that only tools of destruction could be: beautiful clean lines, purposeful design, every component engineered for a single goal. The stock was adjustable, the barrel free-floating, the scope mounted with the kind of precision that cost more than most Marines made in a month. Serial numbers were etched into the receiver, telling the story of a weapon that had seen more training rounds than most Marines would fire in their entire careers. Tyler's hands moved over the rifle with something approaching reverence, but also with a familiarity that didn't quite match his apparent inexperience. He checked the bolt operation, tested the trigger pull, examined the scope mounts with the kind of systematic thoroughness that spoke to habits formed somewhere other than Paris Island. His fingers found the adjustment knobs, the safety mechanism, the magazine release, all without conscious thought. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Chun was conducting his standard briefing for the day's exercise, his voice carrying the bored authority of someone who'd given the same speech hundreds of times. "Today's course of fire will consist of 5 rounds. At each of the following distances: 300, 500, 800, and 1,000 yards. You will have unlimited time for the first 3 distances, and 10 minutes for your final string at 1,000. Tyler listened while he prepared his gear, noting the way Chun's voice suggested he expected most of the Marines to fail at the longer ranges. The wind conditions were brutal, the kind that turned long-range shooting from precision work into educated guessing. Most of the Marines would be lucky to hit the target frames, much less score in the black. "Due to range conditions," Chun continued, "we'll be suspending the exercise if wind speeds exceed 25 miles per hour sustained. Current conditions are marginal, so we'll see how it goes." Tyler chambered around with a smooth, practiced motion that drew Chun's attention for the first time. There was something about the way the young Marine handled the weapon, not fumbling, not hesitant, but with the kind of natural flow that usually took years to develop. Chun found himself watching more carefully as Tyler settled into his shooting position. The firing position Tyler assumed was textbook perfect, but more than that, it looked comfortable. His left elbow found its natural place, creating a stable shooting platform. His cheek settled against the stock with the kind of consistency that spoke to muscle memory. His breathing fell into the natural rhythm of precision shooting without conscious thought. When the range went live with its electronic tone, Tyler fired his first shot at 300 yards. The crack of the rifle was clean and sharp, echoing off the concrete barriers in a way that made everyone else's ears ring slightly. Tyler absorbed the recoil like it was nothing, already working the bolt for his second shot before the spotting scope could confirm his hit. "Dead center," called the spotter, surprise evident in his voice. Fring. The second shot joined the first, opening up the group by perhaps half an inch. The third shot tightened it back down. By the time Tyler finished his 5-round string at 300 yards, he'd created a group that could be covered. By a quarter, shot in conditions that had been giving other Marines trouble all day. Chun found himself leaning forward, suddenly paying attention in a way he hadn't planned on. That kind of shooting didn't happen by accident, especially not from Marines who looked like they should be asking for help finding the bathroom. The 500-yard line brought more of the same. Tyler's shots fell into a neat group that would have been impressive on a calm day, but in the current wind conditions looked almost supernatural. He wasn't rushing, wasn't showing off, wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was simply placing bullets exactly where he intended them to go, as if the distance and wind were minor inconveniences to be calculated and dismissed. Brooks found his voice as Tyler prepared for the 800-yard line. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Rodriguez?" Tyler didn't look up from his rifle as he made minute adjustments to his scope. "Montana, Corporal. Grew up hunting with my grandfather." "Hunting what? Mice?" Thompson called out, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Elk mostly, some deer. Prairie dogs when we wanted to practice long shots." The 800-yard target seemed impossibly small through the heat shimmer made smaller by wind that was gusting hard enough to make the target frame sway. Tyler took his time, studying the mirage patterns, reading the grass movement, calculating wind speed and direction with the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught in any school. His first shot at 800 yards struck dead center, punching through the target with authority that made the paper snap. The second shot opened the group slightly, catching a wind shift that Tyler immediately corrected for. By his fifth shot, he'd created another group that defied explanation, especially given the conditions and the fact that he was using an unfamiliar rifle. The range had gone completely quiet except for the methodical crack of Tyler's rifle and the distant hum of air conditioning units fighting the Virginia heat. Even Thompson and Martinez had stopped their commentary, watching with the kind of fascination usually reserved for traffic accidents or natural disasters. Chun approached Tyler's position as the young Marine prepared for the 1,000-yard line. "Rodriguez, what's your background?" "Real background, not what's in your file." Tyler looked up from his rifle for the first time since beginning the exercise. His eyes were steady, calm, showing none of the nervousness that should have accompanied his first time on a major range. "Grew up on a ranch outside Billings, Staff Sergeant. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8. He was Korean War, competitive shooter after he got out." "Competition shooting?" Brooks had joined them, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. "What kind of competition?" "Long range mostly. 1,000 yards, sometimes more. Grandfather said if you could hit a prairie dog at 800 yards in Montana wind, you could hit anything anywhere." Chun studied Tyler's face, looking for signs of exaggeration or false bravado. What he saw was the quiet confidence of someone who'd been doing something for so long it had become as natural as breathing. "How many rounds you figure you fired in your life, Rodriguez?" Tyler shrugged. "Hard to say, Staff Sergeant. Grandfather and I went out every weekend from the time I was 8 until I left for the Corps. Probably put a couple hundred rounds downrange every trip. The mathematics were staggering. 12 years of weekend shooting, 50 weekends a year, 200 rounds per trip. That was over 100,000 rounds of practice, more than most Marines fired in their entire careers. All informal, all learned from a grandfather who'd apparently been serious enough about marksmanship to pass on skills that looked supernatural to people who'd learned shooting from manuals." "Show me the 1,000-yard line," Chun said quietly. The 1,000-yard targets looked like postage stamps through the scope, made even smaller by heat waves that turned the air into a liquid medium. The wind was gusting harder now, shifting direction every few seconds, creating conditions that would challenge expert marksmen with decades of experience. Most Marines would be lucky to hit the target frame, much less score any meaningful hits. Tyler settled into his position with the same methodical precision he'd shown all afternoon. But now there was something different in his approach, a heightened focus that suggested he understood the challenge ahead. He spent long minutes studying the wind patterns, watching grass movement, reading the subtle signs that most people never noticed. His breathing settled into the deep, controlled rhythm of someone entering a meditative state. His pulse slowed. His world narrowed down to the relationship between rifle, target, and the environmental factors that would determine where his bullet traveled over the 8 seconds it would take to cover 1,000 yards. Tyler fired his first shot at the 1,000-yard line, and everyone on the range watched the distant target frame for what seemed like an eternity before the spotter's voice crackled over the radio. Hit. 9 ring, 11 o'clock. A murmur went through the assembled Marines. A hit at 1,000 yards in these conditions was impressive for anyone, remarkable for someone with Tyler's apparent experience level. Tyler made a minute adjustment to his scope and fired again. This time the spotter's voice carried a note of disbelief. X-ring, dead center. The third shot joined the second in the center of the target. The fourth opened the group slightly, but stayed well within the scoring rings. Tyler was preparing for his fifth and final shot when the sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention. 3 Humvees rolled through the main gate, carrying what was obviously a high-ranking inspection party. The lead vehicle flew. A pennant that identified it as carrying a general officer, and the professional urgency with which range personnel began straightening up suggested this wasn't a routine visit. But Tyler didn't notice the commotion. His world had narrowed down to the mathematical relationship between his rifle and a target that existed at the very edge of what was possible. He was reading wind patterns with the intuitive understanding that came from thousands of hours of practice, calculating trajectory with the kind of precision that turns shooting into applied physics. The wind was shifting again, a complex pattern that would require perfect timing to navigate successfully. Tyler waited, patient as a stone, for the moment when all the variables aligned. When that moment came, he took his shot. The bullet traveled through space for what seemed like forever, carrying with it the hopes and doubts of everyone watching. When it finally found its target, the spotter's voice was barely a whisper. X-ring. Dead center. That's impossible. Tyler had just created a 5-shot group at 1,000 yards that could be covered by a coffee cup, shot in wind conditions that had been shutting down the range all day. It was the kind of shooting that belonged in record books, not in routine training exercises. As Tyler safed his rifle and began his post-shooting routine, Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Stone climbed out of the lead Humvee and began walking toward Echo range with the purposeful stride of someone who'd heard something interesting on the radio. Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Stone moved across the range complex with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned to conserve energy for when it mattered most. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet authority that came from 24 years of Marine Corps service, most of it spent in places that didn't appear on tourist maps. Her uniform was regulation but worn, the fabric soft from countless washings, her boots scuffed from actual use rather than parade ground precision. Stone had the kind of presence that made other Marines straighten unconsciously when she passed. Not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it through the accumulation of experiences that left marks on both body and soul. A thin scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, courtesy of shrapnel from an IED in Fallujah. Her right hand showed the telltale signs of burns from handling hot weapons under fire. These weren't decorations or affectations, they were the natural consequence of a career spent at the sharp end of America's foreign policy. Her eyes were the pale gray of winter sky, the kind that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. They tracked the range layout automatically, noted the wind flags, cataloged the positions of personnel and equipment. She'd spent the Last 18 months in places that required constant situational awareness, and civilian life hadn't dulled those instincts yet. Stone had been conducting a routine inspection of training facilities when the radio chatter from Echo Range caught her attention. Something about a young Marine shooting groups that defied explanation, creating precision that bordered on the impossible. As the senior marksmanship instructor for the entire East Coast, such reports fell within her area of professional interest. As someone who'd spent years identifying and developing exceptional talent, they fell within her personal obsession. The inspection party that accompanied her consisted of a colonel from Training and Education Command, a major from the Weapons Training Battalion, and enough administrative personnel to ensure that every detail of their visit would be properly documented and filed in triplicate. But Stone's attention was entirely focused on the range where she could hear the methodical crack of precision rifle fire cutting through the afternoon heat. She approached the firing line with the practiced eye of someone who could assess a shooter's capability from their stance alone. What she saw at lane 12 made her pause mid-stride, her professional composure cracking slightly for the first time in recent memory. The young Marine behind the rifle moved with an economy of motion that spoke to thousands of hours of practice. His breathing was controlled, rhythmic, the deep cadence of someone who'd learned to enter a meditative state while managing the complex mathematics of long-range shooting. His position was textbook perfect, but more than that, it looked natural, the way a pianist's hands found the keys without conscious thought. But it was the way he read the wind that caught Stone's attention. She watched him study the mirage patterns, track the movement of grass and dust, calculate environmental factors with the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught in any formal course. He was reading the range like a book written in a language most Marines never learned to speak fluently. Stone had seen thousands of Marines shoot over the course of her career. She could identify natural talent within minutes, spot the difference between competent and exceptional with a glance. What she was witnessing at lane 12 fell into a category she'd encountered perhaps a dozen times in her entire career, the kind of natural ability that transcended training and entered the realm of artistry. The young Marine's name tape read Rodriguez, and something about the name stirred a memory that Stone couldn't quite place. She'd encountered so many Marines over the years that individual names often blurred together, but there was something familiar about this particular combination of surname and shooting ability that nagged at her consciousness like a forgotten song. Staff Sergeant Chun approached her with the nervous energy of someone who'd suddenly found himself in the presence of a legend. Chun's reputation as a competent instructor was well established, but Stone existed in a different category, entirely someone whose expertise was acknowledged throughout the corps, whose opinions carried weight at levels where policy was made and careers were shaped. "Gunny, I've never seen anything like this," Chun said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that the other Marines couldn't overhear. "This kid just shot a 5-round group at 1,000 yards that you could cover with a coffee cup in these wind conditions. With a rifle he's never fired before today." Stone nodded without taking her eyes off Tyler, who was beginning his post-shooting routine with the same methodical precision he'd shown throughout the exercise. "What's his background, Staff Sergeant?" "Fresh out of Paris Island, according to his file. But he says he learned to shoot from his grandfather in Montana. Claims they went out every weekend for 12 years, shooting prairie dogs and elk." The mention of Montana triggered the memory Stone had been struggling to access. She'd known a Marine from Montana years ago, someone whose shooting ability had become legendary within certain circles of the corps. The connection was tenuous, possibly coincidental, but worth investigating. His grandfather's name wouldn't happen to be Rodriguez too, would it? Stone asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Chun consulted his roster, flipping through pages until he found Tyler's emergency contact information. "Says here next of kin is Elena Rodriguez, grandmother, Billings, Montana. Emergency Contact 2 is Jesus Gunny. Emergency Contact 2 is Raymond Rodriguez, grandfather, same address. Stone felt something cold settle in her stomach. Raymond Rodriguez. She hadn't heard that name in 15 years, hadn't thought about him in longer than that. But the memory came flooding back with the clarity of traumatic recollection. Korea, 1951. The frozen hell of the Chosin Reservoir, and a young Marine, whose shooting had kept an entire company alive during the longest retreat in Marine Corps' history. Staff Sergeant, Stone said carefully, I need you to find out everything you can about Tyler Rodriguez's family background, specifically his grandfather. Cross-reference with Korean War veterans, competitive shooting records, anything you can dig up. Shun nodded and headed toward the range office to begin his research, leaving Stone alone with her thoughts and the young Marine who was carefully cleaning his rifle with the kind of attention most people reserved for religious ceremonies. Tyler's hands moved over the weapon with practiced efficiency, breaking down the bolt carrier group, checking for carbon buildup, ensuring that every component was properly maintained. It was clear that someone had taught him not just how to shoot, but how to care for the tools that made shooting possible. The rifle was an extension of himself, deserving of respect and meticulous attention. Lance Corporal Thompson and PFC Martinez had been watching the entire exercise with growing unease. Their earlier confidence had evaporated like morning dew under the Virginia sun, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they'd been mocking someone whose abilities made their own look amateurish by comparison. Thompson had always prided himself on being the best shooter among the younger Marines at Quantico. His qualification scores were consistently high, his technique was solid, and his knowledge of ballistics was better than average. But what he'd just witnessed fell into a completely different category, the kind of shooting that belonged in competition records rather than routine training exercises. Martinez was struggling with a different kind of discomfort. His entire identity at Quantico was built around being Thompson's loyal follower, the sidekick who laughed at the right moments and provided an audience for Thompson's superiority complex. But superiority required someone to feel superior to, and Tyler Rodriguez was demonstrating skills that made both of them look like beginners. The wind continued to gust across Echo Range, creating conditions that would have challenged expert marksmen with decades of experience. Heat waves danced off the concrete and asphalt, distorting vision and making accurate range estimation nearly impossible. The fact that Tyler had managed to shoot precisely in such conditions suggested abilities that went far beyond what should have been possible for someone with his apparent experience level. Corporal Brooks found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about marksmanship training. His own background as an Army sniper had given him a certain arrogance about his abilities, a confidence that came from years of formal training and successful deployments. But what Tyler had just demonstrated challenged his fundamental understanding of how shooting skills were developed and maintained. The precision Tyler had displayed wasn't just impressive, it was historically significant. Brooks had read about shooting of this caliber in military historical accounts, stories of legendary marksmen whose abilities had influenced the outcome of battles. But he'd never expected to witness such shooting firsthand, especially not from a Marine who looked like he should be asking for help finding the chow hall. Sergeant First Class Park, the range safety officer, was struggling with his own professional confusion. Park's job was to ensure that all shooting activities on Echo Range met safety standards and followed established protocols. He'd witnessed thousands of Marines shoot over the years, had developed a professional eye for identifying dangerous or incompetent behavior. But Tyler Rodriguez had demonstrated shooting that fell outside Park's normal experience. The young Marine's technique was flawless, his safety procedures were impeccable, and his results were extraordinary. Park found himself wondering whether he should file a routine training report or something more significant, the kind of documentation that would draw attention from higher headquarters. The inspection party that had accompanied Gunnery Sergeant Stone was beginning to take notice of the unusual activity at Echo Range. Colonel Harrison from Training and Education Command had intended this to be a routine facility inspection, the kind of administrative requirement that filled calendars, but rarely produced anything noteworthy. But the radio chatter from the range, combined with Stone's obvious interest in whatever was happening at Lane 12, suggested that something significant was unfolding. Harrison had enough experience to recognize when routine activities were becoming historically significant, and he began to pay closer attention to the young Marine who was causing such a stir. Major Williams from the Weapons Training Battalion was conducting his own assessment of the situation. Williams' responsibility was to evaluate training effectiveness and identify areas where improvements could be made to Marine Corps' marksmanship programs. What he was witnessing suggested that current training methods might be missing something fundamental about how exceptional shooting skills were developed. Tyler finished cleaning his rifle and began to pack his gear with the same methodical precision he'd shown throughout the exercise. His movements were unhurried, economical, suggesting someone who'd learned to maintain equipment properly through long practice rather than formal instruction. Every action served a purpose, nothing was wasted, and the end result was a level of organization that would have impressed drill instructors. The other Marines on the firing line had stopped their own activities to watch Tyler's post-shooting routine. There was something mesmerizing about the way he handled his equipment, not showing off, not drawing attention to himself, but simply demonstrating a level of competence that made everyone else feel inadequate by comparison. Stone approached Tyler's position as he finished packing his gear. Up close, she could see details that hadn't been visible from a distance. The way his hand showed calluses in places that suggested extensive trigger time. The slight squint lines around his eyes that came from years of studying distant targets. The unconscious way he checked wind direction even when he wasn't actively shooting. "Outstanding shooting, Marine," Stone said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of professional respect that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Tyler looked up from his gear bag, meeting Stone's gaze directly for the first time. His eyes showed the same steady focus he'd demonstrated while shooting, calm, alert, unimpressed by rank or authority. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. Where did you learn to read wind like that?" Stone asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer would be significant. "My grandfather taught me, Gunnery Sergeant. He said wind was just another language, and if you spent enough time listening, you'd eventually understand what it was trying to tell you." Stone felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. The philosophy, the approach to shooting as something more than just technical skill. It all matched what she remembered about Raymond Rodriguez's approach to marksmanship. The old Marine had treated shooting like a form of meditation, a way of achieving perfect harmony between mind, body, and environment. "Your grandfather wouldn't happen to be Raymond Rodriguez, would he?" Stone asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Tyler's expression changed slightly, not surprise exactly, but recognition that this conversation was moving in a direction he hadn't anticipated. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. You knew him?" "I knew of him," Stone replied carefully. "His reputation in certain circles of the Corps is quite significant." The wind gusted harder across Echo Range, rattling the target frames and sending dust devils spinning across the firing line. The heat was becoming oppressive, even for Virginia in October, and most of the other Marines were beginning to pack up their gear in preparation for the end of the training day. But Tyler remained at his position, apparently unaffected by the environmental conditions that were making everyone else uncomfortable. He stood at a relaxed position of attention, waiting for whatever was going to happen next with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. Staff Sergeant Chun returned from the range office carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. His expression suggested that whatever research he'd conducted had been both successful and significant. He approached Stone and Tyler with the careful bearing of someone who was about to deliver information that would change everyone's understanding of the situation. "Gunnery Sergeant," Chen said quietly, "I think you need to see this." Stone accepted the folder and began reading, her expression growing more serious with each page. The documentation painted a picture of Tyler's grandfather that was both impressive and historically significant. Korean War veteran, Medal of Honor recipient, competitive shooter whose records had stood for decades. But it was the final piece of information that made Stone's breath catch in her throat. Raymond Rodriguez had served in the same company, the same platoon, that Stone's own grandfather had died trying to defend during the retreat from Chosin Reservoir. The connection wasn't just professional, it was personal, woven into the fabric of Marine Corps history that had shaped Stone's own family legacy. Tyler watched Stone read through the documentation, noting the way her expression changed as she processed information that obviously held significance beyond what was written on the pages. He'd grown up hearing stories about his grandfather's Marine Corps service, but the details had always been vague, filtered through decades of time, and his grandmother's reluctance to discuss the more traumatic aspects of combat experience. The inspection party was beginning to gather around Lane 12, drawn by the obvious significance of whatever was unfolding. Colonel Harrison and Major Williams positioned themselves where they could observe without interfering, their professional instincts telling them that they were witnessing something that would require formal documentation. Thompson and Martinez had retreated to a respectful distance, their earlier mockery replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they'd been making jokes about someone whose family history was woven into the most heroic chapters of Marine Corps legend. The shame was visible on their faces, the kind of deep embarrassment that came from understanding how badly they'd misjudged both the situation and the person they'd been ridiculing. The afternoon heat continued to build, but no one seemed inclined to seek shelter. There was something electric in the air, a sense that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The convergence of past and present, of inherited skill and individual achievement, created an atmosphere that transcended routine training activities. Stone closed the folder and looked at Tyler with new understanding. The shooting she'd witnessed wasn't just exceptional individual performance, it was the continuation of a family tradition that reached back to some of the darkest and most heroic moments in Marine Corps history. The skills that Tyler's grandfather had used to keep Marines alive during the frozen hell of Korea had been passed down through 2 generations, refined and preserved like a sacred trust. "Marine," Stone said formally, "I believe we need to have a longer conversation about your family's service to the Corps." Tyler nodded, understanding that whatever was about to happen would change his Marine Corps experience in ways he couldn't yet anticipate. The quiet anonymity he'd hoped to maintain was evaporating like morning fog under the Virginia sun, replaced by a spotlight that would follow him for the rest of his military career. The wind continued to gust across Echo Range, carrying with it the dust and heat of another training day. But for everyone present, this particular afternoon would be remembered as the day they witnessed something extraordinary, the moment when inherited excellence revealed itself in full glory, proving that some traditions transcend time and circumstance to emerge exactly when they're needed most. In the distance, the sound of evening chow formation could be heard echoing across the base, a reminder that even extraordinary moments existed within the routine framework of military life. But none of the Marines at Echo Range seemed eager to leave, understanding instinctively that they were part of something that would be discussed in hushed, reverent tones for years to come. The stage was set for revelations that would transform everyone's understanding of what they'd witnessed, connecting a 20-year-old Marine's impossible shot to events that had shaped the Corps' most cherished traditions. What had begun as Routine marksmanship training was about to become something much more significant, a moment when the past and present collided with the force of a perfectly aimed bullet, finding its target across impossible distance. The silence that followed. Stone's words stretched across echo range like a taut wire ready to snap. Tyler stood motionless, understanding that something fundamental had shifted in the last few minutes, though he couldn't yet grasp the full scope of what was happening. The folder in Stone's hands contained more than just paperwork. It held the weight of family legacy and Marine Corps history that was about to reshape everything he thought he knew about his place in the world. Staff Sergeant Chun found himself in the uncomfortable position of having initiated something much larger than he'd anticipated. What had begun as routine background verification had uncovered connections that reached back to legendary chapters of Marine Corps history. He watched Stone's face as she processed the implications of what she'd read, noting the way her professional composure was being challenged by personal recognition. The documentation Chun had assembled painted a picture that was both comprehensive and staggering. Raymond Rodriguez hadn't just been a competent Marine, he'd been a legend whose exploits had influenced tactical doctrine and training methods that were still being used decades later. His service record read like a catalog of the Corps' most difficult campaigns, punctuated by acts of heroism that had earned him decorations most Marines only read about in history books. But it was the personal details that gave Stone pause. The connection between Tyler's grandfather and her own family. History created layers of significance that transcended professional interest. Raymond Rodriguez had been there during the moments that defined her grandfather's sacrifice, had witnessed events that shaped the trajectory of her own military career through their influence on family tradition. Tyler watched the adults around him exchange glances loaded with meaning he couldn't decode. His grandfather had always been reluctant to discuss his military service in detail, preferring to focus on practical lessons about shooting and outdoor skills rather than war stories. The few details Tyler knew came from his grandmother, and even those had been filtered through decades of time and a natural desire to protect young ears from the harsh realities of combat. Growing up on the ranch outside Billings, Tyler's education in marksmanship had been presented as a practical necessity rather than military training. His grandfather had taught him to read wind patterns for hunting, to calculate range and elevation for taking clean shots at game animals, to maintain weapons as tools rather than instruments of war. The philosophical underpinnings of precision shooting had been woven into those lessons so naturally that Tyler had absorbed them without recognizing their military significance. The weekend trips to the range had been presented as quality time between grandfather and grandson, opportunities to escape the confines of ranch work and school obligations. But now Tyler was beginning to understand that those sessions had been something more deliberate, the careful transmission of skills and knowledge that his grandfather had considered too important to let die with him. Gunnery Sergeant Stone closed the folder and handed it back to Chun, her expression revealing nothing of the emotional complexity she was processing internally. The convergence of past and present created professional obligations that would need to be handled carefully. Tyler's demonstrated abilities couldn't be ignored, but neither could they be exploited without proper consideration of the personal and historical factors involved. "Rodriguez," Stone said formally, "I need you to understand that what happened here today has implications beyond routine training evaluation. Your performance suggests capabilities that will draw attention from higher levels of command." Tyler nodded, though his expression revealed uncertainty about what such attention might mean for his planned military career. He'd enlisted with the intention of serving honorably but quietly, completing his obligation without drawing unwanted notice. The idea that his shooting abilities might disrupt those plans was both flattering and concerning. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his presence adding another layer of authority to the conversation. As the senior officer present, Harrison understood that decisions made in the next few minutes could influence Tyler's entire military trajectory. The Corps had established procedures for identifying and developing exceptional talent, but those procedures assumed that such talent would be discovered through formal evaluation rather than accidental demonstration. "Marine," Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent making decisions that affected young lives. "What are your current military occupational specialty assignments?" Tyler came to attention automatically, responding to the colonel's question with the precision drilled into him during recruit training. "Sir, I'm currently assigned as an infantryman, 311. I've been slotted for advanced infantry training at Camp Leoing following completion of marksmanship qualification." Harrison exchanged glances with Major Williams, both officers recognizing the irony of the situation. The Marine Corps had developed sophisticated systems for identifying and cultivating marksmanship talent. Yet here was someone whose abilities exceeded those of specialized scouts and snipers, and he'd been assigned to a role that wouldn't fully utilize his exceptional skills. The wind continued to gust across Echo Range, creating conditions that had frustrated shooters all afternoon. But Tyler had demonstrated the ability to read and compensate for those conditions with an intuitive understanding that suggested capabilities far beyond normal training outcomes. Such skills represented a strategic asset that the Corps couldn't afford to waste on routine infantry assignments. Major Williams approached Tyler with the careful attention of someone evaluating a rare and valuable resource. Williams' responsibility for weapons training programs meant that he understood better than most how exceptional Tyler's demonstrated abilities truly were. The precision Tyler had displayed under adverse conditions represented the kind of capability that influenced tactical outcomes and saved lives in combat situations. "Rodriguez," Williams said, "have you given any thought to specialized training opportunities within the Corps? Scout sniper school, competitive shooting teams, instructor assignments?" Tyler's response revealed the straightforward honesty that had characterized his approach to everything else. "Sir, I hadn't really thought about it. I enlisted to serve, and I figured I'd go where the Corps needed me most." The humility in Tyler's answer struck everyone present. Here was someone whose natural abilities could have earned him recognition and preferential treatment, yet he seemed genuinely unaware of his exceptional status. The contrast between Tyler's quiet competence and the self-promotion that characterized many Marines made his talents even more remarkable. Thompson and Martinez watched the conversation unfold from a respectful distance, their earlier mockery replaced by a growing understanding of how badly they'd misjudged the situation. Thompson's identity as the range's top young shooter was being challenged by someone whose abilities made his own look amateurish by comparison. The realization was humbling in ways that formal instruction could never achieve. Martinez was experiencing a different kind of education. His tendency to follow Thompson's lead and adopt his attitudes was being confronted by evidence that their shared assumptions about competence and value were fundamentally flawed. The young Marine they'd dismissed as weak and inexperienced had demonstrated skills that neither of them could hope to match. Corporal Brooks found himself reassessing his own expertise and training background. His transition from Army to Marine Corps had given him confidence in his ability to evaluate shooting talent, but Tyler's performance challenged his fundamental understanding of how such skills were developed. The precision Tyler had displayed suggested training methods and philosophical approaches that weren't part of any formal curriculum Brooks had encountered. The afternoon heat was beginning to create additional complications for the assembled group. The Virginia sun was relentless, turning uniforms into personal saunas and making extended outdoor conversations increasingly uncomfortable. But none of the Marines seemed inclined to seek shelter, understanding that they were witnessing something historically significant. Stone made a decision that would influence the trajectory of Tyler's military career and potentially impact Marine Corps' training doctrine. Her authority as senior marksmanship instructor gave her significant influence over how exceptional talent was identified and developed within the Corps. The connection between Tyler's abilities and her own family history added personal investment to what might otherwise have been purely professional considerations. Rodriguez Stone said, "I'm recommending that you be temporarily assigned to advanced marksmanship evaluation and training. This will involve testing that goes beyond routine qualification requirements and may result in reassignment to specialized roles within the Corps." Tyler's response was characteristic of his approach to everything else: calm acceptance without drama or self-aggrandizement. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. Whatever the Corps needs." The simplicity of Tyler's answer concealed the magnitude of what was being offered. Assignment to advanced marksmanship programs represented opportunities that most Marines competed fiercely to achieve. Scout sniper training, competitive shooting teams, instructor positions all carried prestige and career advantages that could influence military and civilian opportunities for decades. But Tyler's response suggested that such considerations were secondary to his commitment to service itself. The contrast between his exceptional abilities and his humble attitude created a combination that was both rare and valuable within military culture. Natural talent combined with genuine humility represented the ideal foundation for developing elite capabilities. Colonel Harrison recognized the significance of what was unfolding and understood that formal documentation would be required to ensure that Tyler's talents were properly recognized and utilized. The Corps had established procedures for handling exceptional cases, but those procedures assumed that such cases would be identified through systematic evaluation rather than accidental discovery. "Major Williams," Harrison said, "I want you to coordinate with Gunnery Sergeant Stone to establish a comprehensive evaluation protocol for Marine Rodriguez. This needs to be thorough, well documented, and conducted according to established procedures for identifying specialized talent." Williams nodded, already beginning to formulate the testing regimen that would be required to properly assess Tyler's capabilities. Such evaluation would need to go far beyond routine marksmanship qualification, incorporating stress testing, environmental challenges, and technical assessments that would provide a complete picture of Tyler's potential contribution to Corps missions. The inspection party that had originally come to Echo Range for routine facility evaluation was now involved in something much more significant. What had begun as administrative oversight was becoming a pivotal moment in a young Marine's career, and potentially in the development of Corps training doctrine. The convergence of exceptional individual talent with institutional recognition created opportunities that occurred perhaps once in a generation. Sergeant First Class Park began to understand that his routine range safety responsibilities had expanded into something historically significant. The documentation requirements for what had transpired would need to be comprehensive and carefully prepared. The Corps would want detailed records of Tyler's performance, the conditions under which it had been achieved, and the circumstances that had led to its discovery. The other Marines who had been training on Echo Range found themselves in the position of witnesses to something extraordinary. Their routine qualification exercises had been overshadowed by a demonstration of shooting that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. The stories they would tell about Tyler's performance would grow in the telling, becoming part of range legend and Corps folklore. Chun realized that his casual decision to investigate Tyler's background had initiated a chain of events that would have far-reaching implications. What had begun as simple curiosity about an exceptional performance had uncovered historical connections and family legacies that added layers of significance to an already remarkable situation. The wind patterns across Echo Range continued to shift and gust, creating the challenging conditions that had made Tyler's shooting so remarkable. The environmental factors that had frustrated other shooters all afternoon served to highlight the exceptional nature of what Tyler had achieved. Precision shooting under adverse conditions represented a level of skill that couldn't be faked or achieved through luck. Tyler remained at his position, patiently waiting for instructions while the adults around him made decisions that would reshape his military future. His calm acceptance of whatever was to come reflected the steady temperament that had enabled his exceptional shooting performance. The same qualities that made him an exceptional marksman: patience, focus, emotional control, served him well in navigating the attention his abilities had attracted. The documentation in the folder Chen had assembled told the story of a family legacy that spanned multiple generations and included some of the Corps' most heroic chapters. Tyler's grandfather had earned his reputation through performance under the most extreme conditions imaginable, demonstrating skills and courage that had influenced Marine Corps' tactical doctrine and training methods. Stone began to understand that Tyler's exceptional shooting wasn't just individual talent. It was the continuation of a family tradition that reached back to foundational moments in Corps' history. The skills that had kept Marines alive during the frozen retreat from Chosin Reservoir had been preserved and transmitted through 2 generations, emerging now in a young Marine whose potential was only beginning to be understood. The afternoon sun continued its relentless assault on Echo Range, but the heat seemed less important than the historical significance of what was unfolding. The convergence of past and present, of family legacy and individual achievement, created an atmosphere that transcended routine training activities and entered the realm of Corps' legend. As the formal evaluation process began to take shape, Tyler found himself at the center of attention that would follow him for the rest of his military career. The quiet anonymity he'd hoped to maintain was being replaced by recognition that would bring both opportunities and obligations he hadn't anticipated. The stage was set for revelations that would connect Tyler's exceptional performance to events that had shaped the Corps' most cherished traditions. What had begun as routine marksmanship training was becoming a moment when the past and present collided with the precision of a perfectly aimed shot finding its target across impossible distance. The weight of family history settled over Echo Range like an invisible blanket as Gunnery Sergeant Stone prepared to reveal the full scope of what Tyler's performance meant within the broader context of Marine Corps' legend. The folder in her hands contained more than service records. It held the documented proof of heroism that had influenced tactical doctrine and inspired generations of Marines who followed. Stone's voice took on the measured cadence of someone delivering information that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of what they'd witnessed. Rodriguez, your grandfather didn't just serve in Korea. He was part of Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines during the Chosin Reservoir Campaign. November 1950, when the Chinese launched their winter offensive and surrounded the entire 1st Marine Division. Tyler's expression remained steady, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of stories he'd heard in fragments throughout his childhood, but never fully understood. His grandfather had been reluctant to discuss the war in detail, preferring to focus on practical lessons rather than painful memories. But certain details had emerged over the years, pieces of a larger picture that Tyler was only now beginning to see clearly. Fox Company was assigned to hold a strategic position designated Hill 1240. Stone continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd studied these events extensively. 240 Marines against 4,000 Chinese troops. In temperatures that dropped to 30 below zero. They held that position for 5 days and nights, preventing the Chinese from cutting off the entire division's retreat route. Colonel Harrison stepped closer, recognizing that this wasn't just family history being shared. It was foundational Marine Corps' legend being connected to present reality. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir represented one of the Corps' finest hours, a demonstration of courage and tactical excellence under impossible conditions that had influenced military doctrine and training methods for decades. The Chinese attacked Fox Company 17 times over those 5 days, Stone said, her words creating vivid images of events that had occurred before most of the assembled Marines were born. By the end of the fighting, only 27 Marines were still capable of bearing arms. Your grandfather was one of them. Tyler absorbed this information with the same calm focus he'd demonstrated while shooting. But those who knew what to look for could see the emotional impact in the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his shoulders. Family stories that had seemed like distant history were being revealed as events that had shaped the corps he now served. Raymond Rodriguez spent those 5 days providing precision fire support that kept the Chinese from overrunning Marine positions. Stone continued. In conditions where most weapons wouldn't function, where the cold made accurate shooting nearly impossible, he maintained effectiveness that kept entire squads alive. His shooting was so precise that Chinese forces began to avoid certain areas entirely rather than risk exposure to his fire. Major Williams understood the tactical significance of what Stone was describing. Precision marksmanship under extreme conditions represented a force multiplier that could influence the outcome of engagements involving much larger numbers of troops. A single exceptional marksman could control terrain, suppress enemy movement, and provide psychological advantages that went far beyond the physical damage their fire inflicted. The official records show that your grandfather was credited with over 100 confirmed eliminations during those 5 days, Stone said, though her tone suggested that the actual numbers were probably higher. But more importantly, his fire discipline and tactical awareness prevented Fox Company from being overrun when any other outcome would have meant the destruction of the entire Marine Division. The mathematics were staggering. 100 confirmed eliminations in 5 days under conditions that made accurate shooting nearly impossible, while under constant attack from overwhelming enemy forces. Such performance transcended exceptional marksmanship and entered the realm of tactical legend that influenced how the corps understood the potential impact of individual excellence. Chun found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about marksmanship training and development. The precision Tyler had demonstrated wasn't just inherited talent, it was the continuation of capabilities that had been proven under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The skills that had kept Marines alive during one of the corps' most desperate battles had been preserved and transmitted through family tradition. After Korea, your grandfather continued to serve, but in a different capacity, Stone said, her voice taking on a tone that suggested the story was entering more personal territory. He became one of the corps' first formal marksmanship instructors, helping to develop training methods that are still being used today. His understanding of precision shooting under adverse conditions influenced the curriculum at scout sniper schools and advanced marksmanship programs. Tyler began to understand why his grandfather's weekend shooting lessons had been so methodical, so focused on fundamentals that had seemed unnecessarily complex for hunting ranch game. The techniques he'd learned weren't just practical skills, they were distilled wisdom from someone who'd proven their effectiveness under life-and-death conditions. The competitive shooting career your grandfather pursued after military service wasn't just hobby, Stone continued. He was testing and refining techniques that he believed could save Marine lives in future conflicts. Every record he set, every competition he won, was essentially research and development for military marksmanship doctrine. The personal connection Stone felt to this story was becoming more apparent. Her own family's military tradition had been shaped by events that Tyler's grandfather had directly influenced. The sacrifices and heroism that had defined her grandfather's service were intricately connected to the precision fire support that Raymond Rodriguez had provided during the Corps' darkest hours. Your grandfather's Medal of Honor citation specifically mentions his marksmanship performance during the final Chinese assault on Fox Company, Stone said, producing another document from the folder. He remained in position despite being wounded, continuing to provide precision fire that prevented the enemy from achieving breakthrough that would have resulted in the complete destruction of Marine forces. Tyler accepted the citation and read it carefully, seeing his grandfather's name connected to language that described heroism of almost mythical proportions. The dry military prose couldn't capture the human cost of what had been achieved, but it provided official recognition of performance that had influenced the course of military history. Thompson and Martinez watched this revelation unfold with growing understanding of how completely they'd misjudged the situation. Their morning mockery of Tyler's appearance and assumed inexperience was being revealed as ignorant commentary about someone whose family legacy represented the pinnacle of Marine Corps' tradition and achievement. The shame they felt wasn't just about being wrong. It was about failing to recognize excellence that had been proven under conditions they couldn't imagine. Their casual cruelty had been directed at someone whose grandfather had embodied everything they claimed to respect about Marine Corps' values and traditions. Brooks realized that his own expertise and training background paled in comparison to the family tradition Tyler represented. The formal sniper training and deployment experience that Brooks took pride in was built on foundational techniques that Tyler's grandfather had helped develop. The student was attempting to evaluate the inheritor of the master's knowledge. "The shooting you demonstrated today," Stone said, addressing Tyler directly, "represents capabilities that your grandfather would recognize and approve of. The precision, the wind reading, the fundamental technique, all of it reflects training methods that he helped establish and refine." Tyler's response revealed the humility that had characterized his approach to everything else. He always said that shooting was about more than just hitting targets. He said it was about understanding your responsibility to be perfect when perfection mattered. Stone nodded, recognizing the philosophy that had guided her own approach to marksmanship instruction. The understanding that precision shooting wasn't just technical skill but moral obligation. The recognition that in military contexts, accuracy could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, between bringing Marines home and writing death notifications. Your grandfather's influence on Marine Corps' marksmanship doctrine extends beyond just technique, Stone continued. He helped establish the psychological and philosophical foundations that we use to develop elite marksmen. The mental discipline, the emotional control, the ethical framework, all of it traces back to principles he helped articulate. Colonel Harrison understood that they were witnessing something historically significant, the emergence of inherited excellence that connected current capabilities to foundational Marine Corps traditions. Tyler's performance wasn't just individual achievement. It was the continuation of a legacy that reached back to some of the Corps' most heroic chapters. "Rodriguez," Harrison said formally, "based on what we've witnessed today and the documentation of your family's service to the Corps, I'm authorizing immediate reassignment to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Unit. You'll be evaluated for potential assignment to Scout Sniper School and consideration for the Marine Corps' competitive shooting team." Tyler's acceptance of this opportunity reflected the same steady temperament that had enabled his exceptional shooting performance. "Yes, sir. I'll do my best to honor my grandfather's legacy." The formal recognition of Tyler's abilities would have far-reaching implications beyond his individual career. His exceptional performance under adverse conditions would be studied and analyzed, potentially influencing training methods and tactical doctrine. The connection between his inherited skills and proven battlefield effectiveness would provide valuable data for understanding how elite capabilities were developed and maintained. Stone made a decision that would affect Tyler's trajectory within the Corps and potentially influence an entire generation of Marine marksmen. "Rodriguez, I'm personally recommending you for advanced instructor training. Your grandfather's techniques need to be preserved and transmitted to future Marines. You may be the only person who fully understands his complete system." The responsibility implied by Stone's recommendation was enormous. Tyler would be expected not just to perform at exceptional levels, but to analyze and teach techniques that had been proven under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The pressure to live up to his grandfather's legacy while forging his own path would be intense. Tyler's response demonstrated the maturity that his exceptional shooting had only hinted at. "Gunnery Sergeant, I understand the honor you're offering. My grandfather always said that knowledge belonged to the corps, not to individuals. If his techniques can help other Marines, then that's what needs to happen." The afternoon sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, casting longer shadows across Echo Range and signaling the end of an extraordinary day. But the implications of what had been discovered would continue to resonate throughout Tyler's career and potentially influence Marine Corps' doctrine for decades to come. The other Marines who had witnessed Tyler's performance would carry the memory of what they'd seen for the rest of their lives. The precision shooting they'd observed would become the standard against which they measured excellence, the proof that individual capability could transcend normal limitations when properly developed and applied. 6 months later, Tyler Rodriguez would graduate at the top of his Scout Sniper class, setting new records for precision shooting under adverse conditions. His performance would lead to assignment as a senior instructor at the Marine Corps' Primer Marksmanship School, where he would teach techniques that his grandfather had developed during the frozen hell of Chosin Reservoir. 1 year later, he would lead a Marine team to victory in the International Military Shooting Competition, demonstrating precision that would earn recognition from military forces around the world. The techniques he employed would be studied and adopted by allied nations, extending his grandfather's influence on military doctrine beyond American forces. 3 years later, during a deployment that would remain classified for decades, Tyler would use his exceptional marksmanship skills to provide precision fire support that would save the lives of an entire Marine platoon surrounded by enemy forces. The radio reports of his performance would use language that echoed the citations written for his grandfather 50 years earlier. But on this particular afternoon at Echo Range, Tyler Rodriguez was simply a 20-year-old Marine who had demonstrated that exceptional ability could emerge from unexpected sources when tradition, training, and natural talent converged under the right circumstances. His impossible shot had proven that legends weren't just historical artifacts. They were living traditions that could manifest whenever the Corps needed them most. The wind continued to gust across Echo Range as the assembled Marines began to disperse, carrying with them the memory of witnessing something extraordinary. The routine marksmanship training that had brought them together had become a moment of historical significance, connecting past heroism to present capability in ways that would influence their understanding of what it meant to be Marines. Tyler packed his gear with the same methodical precision he'd shown throughout the day, preparing to leave Echo Range as quietly as he'd arrived. But everything had changed in the space of a few hours. The anonymous service he'd planned had been replaced by recognition that would follow him for the rest of his military career and beyond. The impossible shot that had started, that all would be discussed and analyzed for years to come, becoming part of Marine Corps' folklore that would inspire future generations of marksmen. But for those who had witnessed it firsthand, the real significance wasn't the technical achievement, it was the proof that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when dedication, tradition, and natural ability combined under the right circumstances. As the sun set over Quantico, casting Echo Range in golden light that softened the harsh military angles of concrete and steel, the legacy of Raymond Rodriguez lived on in his grandson's capable hands. The skills that had kept Marines alive during the Corps' darkest hours would continue to serve new generations of Marines facing their own impossible challenges. The impossible had become routine, tradition had become innovation, and a 20-year-old Marine had proven that some legacies are too important to die. They simply wait for the right moment and the right person to emerge once again in full glory. The golden hour light of approaching evening transformed Echo Range from a harsh training ground into something that resembled hallowed ground, where ordinary Marines had witnessed the emergence of extraordinary capability. The shadows grew longer as the administrative machinery of the Marine Corps began to process the implications of what had been discovered, setting in motion a chain of events that would ripple through the institution for decades to come. Tyler Rodriguez stood beside his gear at Lane 12, understanding that his life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single afternoon. The quiet service he had envisioned was being replaced by recognition that would bring both opportunities and burdens he hadn't anticipated. The weight of family legacy was settling on his shoulders like an invisible pack, heavy with expectations and responsibilities that extended far beyond his individual desires. Staff Sergeant Chun began the process of documenting the day's events with the meticulous attention to detail that such extraordinary circumstances demanded. His report would become part of Marine Corps' historical records, preserved alongside accounts of legendary performances that had shaped the institution's understanding of human potential. The precision of his documentation would be crucial for ensuring that Tyler's demonstrated capabilities were properly recognized and utilized. The formal evaluation process that would determine Tyler's future assignments was already taking shape in the minds of the senior officers present. Colonel Harrison understood that capabilities like those Tyler had demonstrated couldn't be wasted on routine assignments, but they also couldn't be exploited without careful consideration of the personal and institutional factors involved. The Corps had learned from past mistakes where exceptional individuals had been mismanaged or burned out through inappropriate utilization. Major Williams was mentally constructing the comprehensive testing protocol that would be required to fully assess Tyler's potential contributions to Marine Corps missions. Such evaluation would need to go beyond marksmanship to include stress tolerance, tactical understanding, leadership potential, and the psychological factors that determined whether someone could perform consistently under the extreme conditions where elite capabilities were most needed. Gunnery Sergeant Stone felt the weight of personal responsibility for ensuring that Tyler's talents were properly developed and preserved. Her connection to his family's military legacy added layers of obligation that went beyond professional duty. She had witnessed the emergence of inherited excellence that connected current capabilities to foundational Marine Corps traditions, and she understood that such connections were too valuable to be treated carelessly. The other Marines who had been training on Echo Range found themselves in the unique position of having witnessed something that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Their routine qualification exercises had been overshadowed by a demonstration of shooting that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible for individual Marines to achieve. The stories they would tell would become part of range folklore, growing in significance with each retelling. Lance Corporal Thompson approached Tyler with the careful humility of someone who had learned an important lesson about the danger of making assumptions based on appearances. His earlier mockery had been replaced by genuine respect, but more importantly, by understanding that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when tradition, training, and natural ability converged under the right circumstances. Rodriguez, Thompson said quietly, "I owe you an apology for this morning. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about a lot of things." Tyler's response demonstrated the same grace, under pressure, that had characterized his shooting performance. "No apology needed, Thompson. We're all learning what it means to be Marines. Sometimes the lessons come in ways we don't expect." The generosity of Tyler's response made Thompson's shame more acute, but also more educational. Here was someone who had every right to feel superior, yet chose humility and understanding instead. The contrast between Tyler's exceptional abilities and his modest demeanor created a combination that was both rare and valuable within military culture. PFC Martinez found himself struggling with a more complex form of personal revelation. His tendency to follow Thompson's lead and adopt his attitudes was being confronted by evidence that their shared assumptions about competence and value were fundamentally flawed. The experience was forcing him to examine his own judgments and the basis for his opinions about others. The conversation Martinez had with Tyler revealed depths of character that went far beyond marksmanship skills. Tyler's willingness to share credit, deflect praise, and focus on service rather than recognition demonstrated leadership qualities that formal training programs struggled to instill. Natural humility combined with proven excellence created the foundation for the kind of leadership that inspired rather than commanded. Corporal Brooks found himself engaged in a fundamental reassessment of his own expertise and training background. The precision Tyler had displayed challenged his understanding of how elite skills were developed and maintained. The realization that formal training programs might be missing essential elements that could only be transmitted through family tradition was both humbling and educational. The technical aspects of Tyler's shooting performance became the subject of intense analysis among the marksmanship instructors present. The precision he had achieved under adverse conditions suggested techniques and methodologies that weren't part of standard curricula. The opportunity to study and potentially incorporate those techniques into formal training programs represented a significant advancement in Marine Corps' marksmanship doctrine. Sergeant First Class Park began to understand that his documentation of the day's events would become part of historical records that would be studied by future generations of Marines. The routine range safety reports he was accustomed to filing would be inadequate for capturing the significance of what had transpired. His account would need to convey not just the technical achievements, but the human elements that had made those achievements possible. The inspection party that had originally come to Echo Range for routine facility evaluation found themselves witnesses to a moment of institutional significance. Colonel Harrison's administrative visit had uncovered exceptional talent that would influence Marine Corps' doctrine and potentially impact military capabilities in ways that extended far beyond individual performance. The wind patterns across Echo Range continued to shift and change as evening approached, creating the challenging conditions that had made Tyler's shooting so remarkable. The environmental factors that had frustrated other shooters throughout the day served as a constant reminder of the exceptional nature of what Tyler had achieved. Precision shooting under such conditions couldn't be attributed to luck or coincidence. It required skills that had been developed through years of dedicated practice and refined through family tradition. As the formal evaluation process began to take concrete shape, Tyler found himself at the center of attention that would influence every aspect of his Marine Corps career. The anonymous service he had hoped for was being replaced by recognition. That would bring both opportunities for advancement and the pressure that accompanied high expectations. His ability to handle such pressure would be as important as his marksmanship skills in determining his ultimate contribution to the Corps. The connection between Tyler's demonstrated abilities and his grandfather's legendary service created additional layers of significance that extended beyond individual achievement. The skills that had kept Marines alive during some of the Corps' most desperate battles were being continued through family tradition, proving that some legacies transcended time and circumstance to emerge exactly when they were needed most. Stone made arrangements for Tyler to be temporarily assigned to her advanced marksmanship unit while the formal evaluation process was conducted. This would provide him with access to specialized training and resources while protecting him from the kind of mismanagement that had damaged other exceptional individuals in the past. Her personal investment in his success was motivated by both professional obligation and family connection to the legacy he represented. The paperwork required to process Tyler's reassignment and evaluation would be extensive, but Stone understood that proper documentation was essential for ensuring that his talents were recognized and utilized appropriately. The Marine Corps had established procedures for handling exceptional cases, but those procedures had been designed for situations discovered through systematic Evaluation rather than accidental demonstration. Tyler's response to the attention and opportunities being offered demonstrated the maturity that his exceptional shooting had only hinted at. His understanding that his grandfather's techniques belonged to the corps rather than to individuals showed wisdom that went far beyond his years. The responsibility of preserving and transmitting knowledge that had been proven under extreme conditions was something he accepted with the gravity it deserved. The philosophical foundations that Tyler's grandfather had helped establish for Marine Corps' marksmanship doctrine were becoming more apparent through Tyler's own approach to shooting. The understanding that precision wasn't just technical skill but moral obligation. The recognition that accuracy could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure was evident in every aspect of Tyler's performance. The competitive shooting opportunities that would be made available to Tyler represented chances to test and refine his abilities against the best marksmen from military forces around the world. Such competition would provide valuable data about the effectiveness of techniques that his grandfather had developed and help identify areas where further refinement might be possible. The instructor positions that Tyler would eventually assume carried enormous responsibility for transmitting knowledge that had been proven under the most extreme conditions imaginable. His ability to analyze and teach techniques that had been developed through family tradition would influence entire generations of Marine marksmen, extending his grandfather's impact on military doctrine far into the future. The classified deployments that would utilize Tyler's exceptional capabilities would test his skills under conditions that echoed those his grandfather had faced decades earlier. The precision fire support he would provide would save lives and influence tactical outcomes in ways that would never be fully documented or publicly recognized, but would become part of the hidden history that shaped military operations. The records and achievements that Tyler would establish during his Marine Corps career would serve as benchmarks for measuring excellence in precision marksmanship. His performance standards would become the goals that future Marines would strive to achieve, continuing the cycle of inherited excellence that had brought him to Echo Range in the first place. The legacy implications of Tyler's emergence as an elite marksman extended beyond individual achievement to encompass the preservation of knowledge and techniques that might otherwise have been lost. Family traditions that had seemed like personal history were being revealed as institutional assets that could influence Marine Corps' capabilities for decades to come. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, casting Echo Range in the warm light that photographers called the golden hour, the assembled Marines began to understand that they had witnessed something that would be remembered and discussed for generations. The impossible shot that had started the day's revelations would become part of Marine Corps' folklore, but the real significance lay in what it represented about the continuation of excellence through family tradition. The administrative processes that would shape Tyler's military career were already in motion, but the human elements that had made his achievements possible couldn't be captured in official documentation. The patience, dedication, and wisdom that his grandfather had invested in weekend shooting lessons had created capabilities that would serve the Corps in ways that Raymond Rodriguez could never have anticipated. The evening formation that would signal the end of the training day was still hours away, but the Marines at Echo Range understood that this particular afternoon had already ended in a way that transformed routine training into historical significance. The convergence of past and present, family legacy and institutional need had created a moment that would influence Marine Corps' doctrine and inspire future generations of marksmen. Tyler packed his gear with the same methodical precision he had shown throughout the day, but everything had changed in the space of a few hours. The quiet service he had planned was being replaced by recognition that would follow him throughout his military career and beyond. The impossible shot that had revealed his abilities would be discussed and analyzed, but for Tyler, it represented simply the first step in honoring his grandfather's legacy while forging his own path within the Marine Corps. the wind continued to gust across Echo Range as the Marines began to disperse, carrying with them memories of witnessing something extraordinary. The routine marksmanship training that had brought them together had become a demonstration of what was possible when dedication, tradition, and natural ability combined under the right circumstances. The impossible had become routine, tradition, had become innovation, and a 20-year-old Marine had proven that some legacies were too important to die. They simply waited for the right moment and the right person to emerge once again in full glory, ready to serve new generations of Marines, facing their own impossible challenges. 3 weeks later, Tyler Rodriguez found himself standing in the pristine corridors of Marine Corps' headquarters at Quantico, wearing dress blues that still felt foreign after months of utilities and training gear. The building's marble floors reflected overhead lights with mirror-like precision, creating an atmosphere of institutional gravitas that reminded every visitor of the weight of Marine Corps' tradition and the seriousness of the decisions made within these walls. The office of the Commandant of the Marine Corps occupied a corner of the building that commanded views of the Virginia countryside. But Tyler's attention was focused entirely on the 4-star general who sat behind a mahogany desk that had witnessed decades of decisions affecting Marine Corps' doctrine and policy. General Patricia Hayes had earned her position through a combination of tactical brilliance and administrative excellence that made her one of the most respected leaders in Marine Corps history. Beside her stood Colonel Harrison, whose routine facility inspection had uncovered Tyler's exceptional abilities, and Gunnery Sergeant Stone, whose expertise in marksmanship doctrine had provided the context necessary for understanding what Tyler's performance meant within the broader scope of Marine Corps' capabilities. The presence of such senior leadership for what was essentially a meeting with a junior enlisted Marine spoke to the significance that Tyler's abilities had assumed within institutional planning. The comprehensive evaluation that had been conducted over the previous weeks had produced results that challenged fundamental assumptions about individual capability and the development of elite skills. Tyler's performance under controlled conditions had been even more impressive than his initial demonstration at Echo Range, suggesting abilities that placed him among the most naturally gifted marksmen in Marine Corps history. But the evaluation had revealed more than just technical proficiency. Tyler's psychological profile indicated the kind of emotional stability and mental discipline that enabled consistent performance under extreme stress. His leadership potential was evident in the way other Marines responded to his quiet competence and genuine humility. Most importantly, his understanding of his grandfather's techniques and philosophy provided access to knowledge that had been proven under the most demanding conditions imaginable. General Hayes studied Tyler with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating young Marines and making decisions that would influence their careers and the institution's capabilities. Her assessment went beyond Tyler's documented abilities to encompass the intangible qualities that determined whether someone would thrive under the pressures that accompanied exceptional recognition within military culture. Rodriguez, General Hayes said, her voice carrying the authority that came from commanding an institution of over 200,000 Marines. Your performance evaluations indicate capabilities that place you among the elite marksmen in our Corps' history. But more than that, they suggest potential contributions that could influence our doctrine and training methods for decades to come. Tyler's response demonstrated the same steady temperament that had characterized his approach to everything else. Ma'am, I understand the honor of being here, and I'm committed to serving the Corps in whatever capacity is most needed. The humility in Tyler's answer reinforced General Hayes' assessment that he possessed the personal qualities necessary to handle the responsibilities that would accompany his exceptional abilities. Natural talent combined with genuine modesty created the foundation for leadership that inspired rather than intimidated, that built capability rather than dependency. Your grandfather's influence on Marine Corps' marksmanship doctrine extends far beyond what most people realize. General Hayes continued. The techniques he developed and the philosophical approaches he established are woven into the fabric of how we train our most elite marksmen. Your emergence as someone who has inherited and can articulate those techniques represents an opportunity to preserve and expand knowledge that might otherwise be lost. The weight of that responsibility settled on Tyler's shoulders like an invisible burden. He was being asked not just to perform at exceptional levels, but to serve as the bridge between past excellence and future capability. The knowledge that his grandfather had earned through combat experience would need to be analyzed, codified, and transmitted to ensure that its benefits extended beyond family tradition. Colonel Harrison had spent the week since Echo Range working with institutional planners to develop a career path that would maximize Tyler's contributions while protecting him from the kind of mismanagement that had damaged other exceptional individuals. The plan that had emerged balanced Tyler's development as an individual Marine with the Corps' need to leverage his unique capabilities for institutional benefit. Rodriguez, we're creating a special program that will allow you to contribute to multiple aspects of Marine Corps' marksmanship development, Colonel Harrison explained. You'll rotate between competitive shooting, advanced instruction, tactical deployment, and doctrine development. This will ensure that your abilities serve the Corps while providing you with the diverse experience necessary for long-term career success. The program being described represented an unprecedented investment in individual development, reflecting the institutional recognition that Tyler's capabilities justified extraordinary measures. The resources being committed would provide him with opportunities available to perhaps a dozen Marines in any generation, but they would also create expectations for performance and contribution that would follow him throughout his career. Gunnery. Sergeant Stone had been working with weapons development specialists and training experts to analyze the techniques that Tyler had inherited from his grandfather. The process had revealed refinements and innovations that weren't part of current curricula, suggesting that family tradition had preserved knowledge that formal institutions had lost or never fully captured. The technical analysis of your shooting methods has identified several elements that we believe could improve our training effectiveness, Stone explained. Your grandfather's approach to wind reading, his techniques for maintaining precision under stress, and his methods for developing consistent shooting positions all represent potential improvements to our current doctrine. The opportunity to influence Marine Corps' training methods carried enormous responsibility for ensuring that any changes were based on sound principles and proven effectiveness. Tyler's understanding of his grandfather's techniques would need to be comprehensive enough to support systematic analysis and careful implementation across the institution's training programs. The competitive shooting opportunities that would be made available to Tyler represented chances to test refined techniques against the best marksmen from military forces around the world. International military shooting competitions provided venues for demonstrating American capabilities while gathering intelligence about foreign training methods and equipment developments. You'll be assigned to our premier competitive shooting team within the next 6 months, General Hayes said. This will provide opportunities to represent the Corps at the highest levels while testing and refining the techniques you've inherited. Your performance will influence how other military forces view Marine Corps' capabilities. The pressure associated with representing the Marine Corps in international competition would test Tyler's psychological resilience as much as his technical skills. The expectation that he would not just compete, but dominate created stakes that went beyond individual achievement to encompass institutional reputation and national prestige. The instructor positions that Tyler would eventually assume carried responsibility for transmitting knowledge to Marines who would deploy to combat zones where precision marksmanship could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The techniques he taught would need to be effective under conditions that couldn't be fully replicated in training environments. Your eventual assignment as a senior instructor will involve training Marines who will serve as designated marksmen and scout snipers in operational units, Stone explained. The techniques you teach will be tested under combat conditions, which means your instruction carries direct responsibility for Marine lives and mission outcomes. The moral weight of that responsibility was something Tyler understood instinctively. His grandfather had emphasized that precision shooting wasn't just technical skill, but ethical obligation, the recognition that accuracy under pressure could determine whether fellow Marines returned home safely or became casualties of inadequate preparation. The classified deployment opportunities that would utilize Tyler's exceptional capabilities would test his abilities under conditions that echoed those his grandfather had faced decades earlier. The precision fire support he would provide would save lives and influence tactical outcomes in ways that would never be fully documented or publicly recognized. There will be operational assignments where your capabilities will be employed in classified contexts, General Hayes said carefully. These missions will require performance under extreme conditions where failure is not acceptable. Your grandfather's legacy suggests that you understand what such responsibility entails. The understanding that his abilities would be tested under life and death conditions was something Tyler accepted with the gravity it deserved. The skills that had been transmitted through family tradition would be proven once again in combat, continuing a cycle of excellence that reached back to foundational moments in Marine Corps' history. The technological developments that Tyler would contribute to involved collaboration with weapons manufacturers and equipment specialists to optimize rifles, ammunition, and accessories for maximum precision under field conditions. His practical experience with techniques that had been proven under combat conditions would inform design decisions that influenced equipment used throughout the Marine Corps. Your input will be valuable for developing the next generation of precision weapons and accessories, Colonel Harrison explained. The techniques your grandfather developed were constrained by the equipment available during his era. Modern technology provides opportunities to enhance those techniques in ways that could revolutionize precision marksmanship. The opportunity to influence weapons development represented a chance to honor his grandfather's legacy, while advancing Marine Corps' capabilities into the future. The integration of proven techniques with modern technology could produce capabilities that exceeded what either element could achieve independently. The research projects that Tyler would support involved collaboration with military historians and tactical analysts to document and analyze precision marksmanship, techniques that had influenced historical battles and campaigns. His family's knowledge would contribute to scholarly understanding of how individual excellence could impact large-scale military operations. Your grandfather's combat experience represents a case study in how exceptional marksmanship can influence tactical outcomes, Stone said. Your ability to articulate his techniques and philosophy will contribute to academic understanding of precision warfare and its applications in modern military operations. The scholarly aspects of Tyler's contributions would ensure that the knowledge he represented was preserved in forms that could benefit future generations of military professionals. The techniques that had been transmitted through family tradition would be codified and analyzed to extract principles that could be applied more broadly. The leadership development opportunities that Tyler would receive were designed to prepare him for senior positions where he could influence Marine Corps policy and doctrine at the highest levels. His technical expertise would be combined with formal military education to create the foundation for strategic thinking about precision, marksmanship, and its role in future conflicts. Your career path includes advanced military education and leadership assignments that will prepare you for senior positions, General Hayes explained. The Corps needs leaders who understand both the technical and strategic aspects of precision warfare. Your background provides a unique foundation for That kind of comprehensive understanding, the vision being described, would see Tyler eventually assume positions where he could influence Marine Corps doctrine and policy at levels where strategic decisions were made. His technical expertise would inform institutional planning about precision marksmanship capabilities and their integration into broader military operations. 6 months later, Tyler Rodriguez would lead the Marine Corps shooting team to victory in the International Military Marksmanship Championship, setting records that would stand for decades, while demonstrating techniques that other military forces would study and attempt to replicate. His performance would establish American dominance in precision shooting sports, while advancing his grandfather's legacy on the international stage. 2 years later, he would graduate from the Marine Corps' most prestigious leadership development program, earning recognition as both an exceptional marksman and a capable leader. His combination of technical expertise and leadership ability would make him a valuable asset for assignments that required both tactical competence and strategic understanding. 5 years later, Tyler would be promoted to senior non-commissioned officer rank while serving as the chief instructor at the Marine Corps' Promer Marksmanship School. His teaching methods, based on techniques inherited from his grandfather and refined through modern analysis, would produce graduates whose performance exceeded historical standards for precision shooting under stress. 10 years later, he would be selected for commissioning as an officer, beginning a second career phase where his technical expertise would be combined with formal command authority. His unique background would make him valuable for positions that required deep understanding of precision warfare and its applications in modern military operations. 20 years later, Tyler would assume command of the Marine Corps' Advanced Marksmanship Development Program, where he would oversee research and development efforts that would influence precision warfare doctrine for the next generation. His career would span from individual excellence to institutional leadership, always guided by the principles his grandfather had instilled during weekend shooting lessons on a Montana ranch. But on this particular afternoon in the commandant's office, Tyler Rodriguez was simply a 20-year-old Marine who had demonstrated exceptional abilities and was being offered opportunities to serve the Corps at the highest levels. His acceptance of those opportunities would honor his grandfather's legacy while forging new paths for precision marksmanship within Marine Corps doctrine. The impossible shot that had started his journey from anonymity to recognition would become part of Marine Corps legend, but Tyler understood that it was only the beginning of a career dedicated to preserving and advancing the techniques that had kept Marines alive during the Corps' most desperate battles. His grandfather's legacy would live on through his service, ensuring that excellence transcended generations to emerge whenever the Corps needed it most. The wind had been gusting across Echo Range on that October afternoon when Tyler first demonstrated abilities that would reshape his entire military career. Now, months later, the implications of that demonstration were being realized through opportunities and responsibilities that would influence Marine Corps doctrine and capability for decades to come. The tradition that had begun with a Medal of Honor recipient's combat performance in Korea was continuing through his grandson's service in a new era, proving that some legacies were too important to fade with time. They waited instead for the right moment and the right person to emerge once again, ready to serve new generations of Marines with the same dedication and excellence that had defined their origins. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.